Good morning, it's AirTalk. I'm Larry Mantle. Well, the controversy over statements by Chick-Fil-A's president Dan Cathy have certainly not died down. Yesterday, there was a Chick-fil-A Appreciation Day, which brought out thousands of people at Chick-fil-A stores across the country. Lines went down the block. Some of the stores ran out of chicken, and the company says it was a record-setting day for sales. But what about the long-term impact of Cathy's comments? There were some protests at select Chick-fil-A stores, but did they get lost in the day of support for the chain? And will more people end up going to Chick-fil-A who support the company's stance against same-sex marriage than avoid it because of the social views aired by Dan Cathy? Our phone lines are open for you to comment at 866-893-KPCC, 866-893-5722, or the AirTalk page at kpcc.org. Ira Kalb is Assistant Professor of Clinical Marketing at USC's Marshall School of Business. Professor Kalb, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's talk about sort of the history of efforts to protest or to boycott and any backlashes to that. Is there a consistent pattern for when companies take a controversial position? What happens to those companies?
Yes, usually when companies take a controversial position, they have the for and the against, but in the long run, that kind of goes against them. And in this particular case, there's something called a QSR score that measures the brand awareness and acceptance of Chick-fil-A. And before Mr. Cathy made his comment, their score was 65, and last week it dropped to 39. So that is usually an indicator of the long-term effect.
What does that specifically measure?
It measures the brand awareness or the intent to purchase the product. And I know that Mike Huckabee and a lot of other political people that tend to be conservative kind of rallied people to come out to the restaurant yesterday. But there are a lot of people equally, or even a greater number of people I know that I've spoken with that said they're not going to ever go to the restaurant again, that were frequent Chick-fil-A patrons.
Of course, we live on the coast where the attitudes are somewhat different than the heartland. And if I'm not mistaken, the greatest strength of Chick-fil-A is in the southern and central parts of the country where social views are probably somewhat different than here in California, particularly the coastal area here. So I'm just wondering, with a chain like this and given where it's concentrated, whether this really will be that damaging to the brand.
Well, that's a very good point, and they did start in the South, and I know that they're probably going to be stronger there, but already a lot of locations where they wanted to open have said they're not going to allow them to open because of the controversy, and the way a restaurant like that makes its money and continues to grow is by opening new restaurants. The other thing is there are a lot of franchises that have Chick-fil-A, and they've been hurt a lot by this.
So the franchisees, because it's put them in the center of something they didn't sign up for?
Exactly.
We're talking with USC Marshall School of Business professor Ira Kalb. I welcome your calls, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think for Chick-fil-A, in the long run, this does the company no good whatsoever, that it damages the brand, and a corporate executive like this, the president of the company, making a statement to a Baptist publication, later to a Christian broadcaster, that the company supports a traditional view of marriage, as he puts it, and is against same-sex marriage, does that do damage to the company's sales overall? Or because this is an issue on which the public is split, does it not necessarily damage the sales or the brand? We're at 866-893-KPCC or the AirTalk page at kpcc.org. Also joining me is Bill Peacock, Vice President of Research and Planning and Director of the Center for Economic Freedom at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Mr. Peacock, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
What's your analysis about the long-term impact of Dan Cathy's statements?
Well, I think really, we could all sit around and speculate all we want about whether or not this is going to harm Chick-fil-A or not. But I think what we really need to do is just look at the systems and look at today. And the truth of the matter is that the markets are going to decide this, right? There's a lot of people out there who care about this issue or don't care about this issue, and that may or may not impact their desire to go eat and patronize Chick-fil-A. But the marketplace is going to make that decision. If people are offended by this, they don't have to show up, or they can organize boycotts. If they're not, or they support this thing, they can show up to the restaurant, or they can join into the organized support of Chick-fil-A, like apparently tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands did yesterday. And so, which is the great thing about the marketplace, that these folks can go out there and express their opinions that way. And that's very different from what some of the politicians and other people are doing. If the mayor of Chicago, for instance, doesn't like Chick-fil-A's position, he's welcome not to show up at Chick-fil-A, but it's not right for him to start making decisions for other people by trying to exclude Chick-fil-A from that territory just because of his personal opinions.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, he potentially set him up for a lawsuit as well, because if in fact the city of Chicago tries to keep Chick-fil-A from opening, his statement certainly set the table for the potential that the company could file a lawsuit that they aren't being treated fairly because of the point of view of the company's owners. Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, issued a statement after Don Cathy's statement saying Chick-fil-A values are not Chicago values. They disrespect our fellow neighbors and residents. This would be a bad investment since it would be empty. But then Chicago Cardinal Francis George issued a statement on the Archdiocese of Chicago's blog over the weekend, said recent comments by those who administer our city seem to assume that the city government can decide for everyone what are the values that must be held by citizens of Chicago. I was born and raised here, and my understanding of being a Chicagoan never included submitting my value system to the government for approval. Again, you can share your comments on the AirTalk page at kpcc.org or call us at 866-893-KPCC. Dan writes on the AirTalk page, don't kid yourselves. Vast majority of people in this country don't support gay marriage. The issue has been hijacked by radical gay activists, and in this culture, those that yell the loudest get the most attention. David writes on the page, many of you living in L.A. think everyone agrees with your attitudes about gay marriage. I do, but there are still tens of millions who think it's a violation of God's commands. I think they will be unharmed by the CEO's views. 866-893-KPCC or the AirTalk page, kpcc.org. Carrie in Corona, you're on AirTalk.
Yes, I feel that by Chick-fil-A being their stance clearly states that what they're for makes them against human rights, and I feel it's wrong. I would never eat in their restaurant. I think their food is bad anyway. But I think I am tired of seeing gay people put at the back of the bus, metaphorically speaking.
Do you think this will hurt Chick-fil-A, Carrie?
Yes, I do, and I hope it does.
Okay, so you think there'll be more people outraged about Cathy's comments who will stay away than those who would attempt to show support for his statements by patronizing?
I agree with your caller when he said they all came out yesterday to rally, but they won't be back. That was Huckabee getting people out on a one-day basis. But, I mean, we're in this country, we're putting gay people in the same position we put blacks in, 300 years ago, and that in the Bible it said that brown people or dark people were to be our slaves, and that's a fact. That's what our apartheid in Africa was about. And I don't see any difference between what these
okay. Carrie, I appreciate your point. I don't want to debate the issue of gay marriage because that takes us off and all. I really want to keep this to a discussion about the impact on business and whether you think that the CEO, the head of Chick-fil-A, the president coming out and making his statements against same-sex marriage, what is the net effect on Chick-fil-A as a result of that? And what we saw yesterday, is that a one-shot deal, or is that indicative of some longer-term trend that we're going to see with Chick-fil-A, with people rallying to the company's defense? 866-893-KPCC or the AirTalk page, kpcc.org. Nazir in Irvine, you're on AirTalk.
Yeah, hi. Well, basically, the way I see it is we can go on protesting Chick-fil-A's, the president's statement, but at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself who's really going to be affected. Now, the president and all of the executives of Chick-fil-A are going to continue making their money. If they see that a franchise is no longer profitable, they'll shut it down. But the real people that are losing are the average Joes, or guys that just are branching out and franchising out Chick-fil-A. I mean, the other day, someone came out, like one of the owners of a franchise came out and said, hey, I'm running this Chick-fil-A store, but I don't agree with the president's statements. Well, people like that are going to be feeling the effects the most. And trust me, the president will continue making money. He'll continue being profitable, even if he has to shut down 99% of his stores. But it's people like this that are going to suffer the most. So it's something we really have to be careful of. People shouldn't be punished based on one person's opinion on something, no matter how archaic that opinion may be.
Nazir, thank you very much. From Irvine, sharing his perspective, 866-893-KPCC. Bill Peacock of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I wanted to ask you about some of the criticism I've heard from supporters of Kathy's comments that organizing a boycott of the change somehow infringes on his right to free speech. And I wanted to hear your comment on that. That seemed like sort of an odd comment, that engaging in free speech somehow hurts someone's right to speak their mind.
Well, I would disagree with the fact that a boycott is somehow the wrong approach here. I mean, if you disagree with what he said, I mean, that's basically an exercise of free speech as well, and or reacting to somebody else's, and it's just like people in the marketplace can do what they want. You can come out and you can support Chick-fil-A by buying it, or you can not show up. You can organize your friends. I mean, that's the great thing about this country. We can do those kinds of things, unlike situations where the government gets involved. Because when the government gets involved, they start making decisions for the people. Perfect example around this is global warming. Don't want to run too far afield, but over in Europe they have these great carbon controls and all that kind of thing, and they're not accomplishing anything at all. But here in the United States, where we don't have any regulation on global warming, companies have responded to the concern of the public about this issue by reducing their carbon emissions, and we've done more in America on that than they have in Europe without any regulatory controls, and we've done it through the marketplace. So I think this is going to play out in the Chick-fil-A thing, and we're going to see which way it goes.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see if this is a cautionary story for other executives. I mean, already they're shy about getting into a political arena and having a CEO who's outspoken on an issue that is as divisive in this country as same-sex marriage. So maybe there'd be no one else even tempted to do what Kathy did, but certainly, this might be a further cautionary note. We're at 866-893-KPCC or the AirTalk page, kpcc.org. We'll continue our conversation, but first, Hetty Lynn Hurties has the news. It's AirTalk. I'm Larry Mantle. It was a huge sales day for Chick-fil-A stores across the country. Thousands of people lining up. Many of the franchisees, as well as the company stores, ran out of chicken. There were protests at some of them as well, and even a same-sex kissing protest that was held at some of the Chick-fil-A's. But the question is, aside from yesterday and the huge focus on Chick-fil-A, what will be the longer-term impact on the Chick-fil-A franchises, on the stores, in the wake of President Dan Cathy's comments when he said that he and the owners of Chick-fil-A are against same-sex marriage? We're at 866-893-KPCC AirTalk page, kpcc.org. Also joining us is Larry Chavis, Assistant Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship at the University of North Carolina. Professor, thank you for being with us.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
So you are an expert on boycotts and what kind of an impact they have. So how effective do you think a boycott could be with a divisive social issue like this?
Well, I've done some research with Philip Leslie there at UCLA, and we looked at the impact of a boycott of French wines around the beginning of the Iraq War, and we found quite a impact. People were really upset with France because of their position that they took on the war, and we found sales decreasing about 25% in many weeks. But eventually, after 6 months, the effect had gone away. Things were kind of back to normal.
Would you extrapolate from that's likely to happen with Chick-fil-A, that this dies down over time, or is this such a hot button issue that's unlikely to happen?
I think there's the potential for it to die down, but like you said, it is a hot and button issue. It's going to continue to come up, around election times, and it may be one of those cultural issues that we continue to fight out here in the U.S. for a while.
All right. I mentioned earlier about Rahm Emanuel, Chicago's mayor, and there have been other mayors and elected officials who say Chick-fil-A isn't welcome here because of Dan Cathy's statement. Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa of Los Angeles issued a statement yesterday. Los Angeles has one of the most vibrant LGBT communities in this country. I'm proud to support them as we call on Chick-fil-A's leadership to reconsider their position and join the growing majority of Americans who support marriage equality. In Los Angeles and in America, love and liberty will always triumph. That statement from Mayor Villaraigosa. We're at 866-893-KPCC. David in Hemet, you're on AirTalk.
Hey, the only thing I would have to say is with the president's statement is it leaves them open to so many more lawsuits by their own employees because they're supposed to be an equal opportunity employer. Well, if somebody says, well, I was fired for being gay, they actually have a case in point now.
And I don't know what the level of protection is provided for gay employees. Bill Peacock is not that you're necessarily a lawyer, but do you think potentially there's an issue there?
Oh, I'm not an attorney, and I'm not at the top of my game when it comes to labor law. I think a lot of different companies have CEOs and leadership have positions on things that are popular with some and not with others. For instance, global warming, as I mentioned earlier, and other types of things like that. And so this isn't really unique, and of course those don't have so much to do with labor law. But I think the folks that are focusing on this issue and calling it out, they're really making too big a case of it because a lot of corporations, and sometimes not just their CEOs, but their actual policies that they implement, take kind of positions that are not popular to everybody, but they seem to be more liberal positions sometimes, and so they just don't make as big a fuss on the airways.
Okay. And do you have an example of that, of companies that have taken a liberal position and that have maybe caused some customers to avoid that as a result?
Well, I don't know if if the customers avoid them as a result, but this is pretty prevalent in the energy markets. For instance, a lot of companies have made major plays in global warming, renewable energies, those types of things, which not everybody supports, and they're betting big bucks on investments in those things. They're making policy statements. They support legislation, and so they're getting more active than Chick-fil-A is when you just have a CEO making a statement to a publication, but not implementing that in company policy.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when you get to social issues like this, they're, so much more hot button than, say, environmental or economic issues. And so if you have CEOs who come out in favor of same-sex marriage, would that lead to a similar kind of boycott effort with people who are against same-sex marriage or not? I mean, it'd be interesting to look at that. 866-893-KPCC. Adrian in El Segundo, you're on AirTalk. Adrian, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say, as a small business owner myself, I just think it's bad business to express your own personal feelings, attaching that to your business name. My business is set up structurally and for all tax purposes to be separate from my own name, so I would never attach my personal beliefs to my company's name because it's going to affect our bottom dollar. And also it's going to affect my employees who might not necessarily reflect, my opinions. They might not share the same one, so I wouldn't want to bring it on them. Even though I do respect his ability to have his own opinion, I just think... As
a business decision, you think it was a bad one on his part?
I do. I do think it was a bad decision, and I wouldn't have done it. But, I mean, that's just my own personal beliefs. I would love to argue with, discuss my personal beliefs with anyone outside of my business, but I would never attach it to my business name.
All right, Adrian and El Segundo, thanks very much. I mean, the other issue is, what about your employees? If they strongly disagree with the perspective that you take and hear they're working to further the profits of a company that is investing money in causes that you are absolutely opposed to, big impact. And, out of sight, out of mind, if you don't know, what the owners of your company are doing with their money, if you don't know, who they're supporting politically, what causes are most important to them, maybe it's not really a big deal. You just figure they've got their politics and it's, it is what it is. But if it's right there for you to ponder on a daily basis, probably a very different, psychological effect on that. Oliver in Irvine, you're on AirTalk.
Hi. I would just like to clarify something. I think a lot of the outrage and the boycotts against Dan Cathy and Chick-Fil-A are more because of the fact that he's donating millions of dollars to hate groups than just because of the particular stance he holds on marriage equality. Thanks.
What hate groups are you referring to? That's very strong language.
Well, I mean, I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but if you go and look up the groups that he has donated money to, at least one of them has been listed by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group against and promoting intolerance against LGBT people.
Okay. All right, Oliver, I appreciate your call. And yeah, I know Southern Poverty Law Center has their definition of hate groups. Of course, not everybody would agree with that. But you're right. I mean, Chick-fil-A has been a donor to support socially conservative groups. And that sort of brings the other question, and that is the customer base that is most passionate about the rights of gay men and lesbians to marry, are they patronizing Chick-fil-A anyway in large numbers? That's really unclear to me. The question is whether that is going to be a loss of business from that segment of the population versus, again, areas of the Bible Belt, where they're extremely strong, where it's not going to be necessarily as big an issue. 866-893-KPCC. Brian writes on the page, I wish all companies and CEOs were this transparent, since voting for politicians seems to be a farce. Our wallets are our voice these days. Let's see. Jeff writes on the page, it's frustrating to hear Chick-fil-A apologists claim the mayors of Chicago and Boston are guilty of trying to force their values on others. The whole reason we're having this conversation is because Chick-fil-A donates a sizable amount of its fortune towards the cause of forcing its values on others. Let's see. Cheryl says, let's thank the Chick-fil-A CEO since he let consumers know what he would use corporate profits to support. It's important to be informed consumers. Let's see. We're at 866-893-KPCC. Ed in West Los Angeles, you're on AirTalk.
Yeah, I was just, your guest says there was no boycott, that he was for a boycott. I just announced that yesterday was announced that Jeff Bezos.
Ed, hang on, because you're breaking up. I'm going to put you on hold, see if we can clear up your phone, and we'll come back to you when we can get you to a better place on your cell. Let's see. Audrey in Upland, you're on AirTalk.
Hi. It seems to me that the reality is that a business owner should support customers because customers spend. And regardless of whether he has personal views, the idea of making public the idea of giving corporate profits to groups that are listed by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which, if you ask me, has a very reasonable standard for a hate group, giving corporate profits, I mean, if you think it's a great idea, give your own money, that's fine. But any time any business takes any position on a social issue, they're going to get blowback from that because somebody's going to disagree.
So let me just clarify. You're making a distinction between the owners of Chick-fil-A taking a portion of the profits, supporting the conservative values in which they believe. That's one thing, but it's publicly making a statement that for you crosses the line. Is that what you're saying?
No. What I'm saying is I don't care what they do with their personal funds. What I care about is what they do with the money that I spend there.
But their personal funds, as I understand it, come from owning Chick-fil-A. I mean, that is where their fortune comes from. So this is their belief system. Do they have a right to take that money and to support their belief system with those dollars?
You know, if my husband runs a region of his company, Well, if he takes company funds and does things, then he's speaking on behalf of the company. If he takes money out of his paycheck and donates it to whoever, he's speaking on behalf of himself. And people are wising up to the fact that our dollars, that's our power. We choose where we spend it. We need to not only make those choices, but we need to be telling companies why we're making those choices. My problem is not with where Dan Cathy chooses to spend his money. My problem is where he takes corporate funds, because he's then making a corporate
I hear you, Audrey. Thank you for that distinction. I appreciate it. 866-893-KPCC. Tom, in Woodland Hills, what impact do you see this having on Chick-fil-A?
Well, I think it has the bigger impact in the generations of his customers to come. The demographics of this issue are tending to trend in favor of equality in the younger generation. And so while there may be a one-day surge and that the folks who currently like it in the Bible Belt stood in line for hours to get their chicken, the younger generation of people are looking at this and saying, my dollars are being contributed to fight against my friends, my family members, and their rights. And that's where I think the big problem is. I haven't supported Chick-fil-A since he came out and made his statement. And I love it. I love the lemonade especially, but I have chosen not to go back specifically because of his announcement and the revelation at $5-6 million on behalf of Chick-fil-A, because he's speaking kind of as both. It's Dan Cathy and Chick-fil-A.
Tom, I think your point, too, about younger customers is a great one, because all the polling that we see shows that younger Americans are more comfortable with same-sex marriage, and the numbers supporting it are pretty overwhelming compared to the population as a whole. And so if this company is based on expansion and growth, and we know that fast food is overrepresented among younger customers, then the point you raise, I think, is a really, really important one, looking at the demographic appeal of the brand. Larry Chavis of University of North Carolina, you want to comment on that?
No, I think that's right. I think in the long run, there certainly will be have been short-term benefits, but that's right. The country is moving in a different way on this, so there could be long-run implications.
And according to the polls I see, moving in that direction pretty rapidly. David in Whittier, you're on AirTalk.
Yes, how are you guys doing?
Good.
I believe right now what they're seeing is just a bandwagon, effect, and they're not going to be able to really talk about how these numbers affect them till months down the road. It's just like the Kings in Los Angeles. I know 100 people that never watched the hockey game that started watching because they were caught up in the moment. I think that's what's happening with all these religious groups. People are standing in line for Chick-fil-A, but the people in the gay and lesbian community that were actually patrons of this restaurant, and when they stop coming and all the bandwagoners stop showing up, that's when they're really going to see their dollars be affected. And I think anyone that expects anything different is crazy.
Yeah. Well, and I suspect it'll be more than just LGBT customers, because that's a minority of the population. It's going to be also all the people who support the right to marry of same-sex couples, and that will probably be an even greater number than actual gay men or lesbians who refuse to patronize it. 866-893-KPCC. John writes on the page, being a gay man who lives in Los Angeles and has a home in South Carolina, I don't think this will impact Chick-fil-A in areas like the South. That said, I do think it'll have an impact on restaurants in major urban areas where the perspective is much broader. Upon hearing Mr. Cathy's comments, he has the right to say what he wants. That's certainly true, but he's using corporate funds for anti-gay organizations. This speaks to someone who's going beyond personal views and using his corporation to fund a religious agenda. Again, your comments on the AirTalk page, kpcc.org. Shannon in Glendale, you're on AirTalk.
Hi there. I was just thinking about the boycott of JCPenney when Ellen was the spokesperson, and all the people up in arms about that, and that completely died down and went away, and I don't know if there was a huge impact on their profits. And then also, unfortunately, I can't remember because it was only a stink for about 2 weeks, there's something about Men's Warehouse during the Occupy movement and where his affinities lied and, lay. And it just seems like, oh, my God. And in 2 weeks, you're not going to remember that.
Yeah. All right. Shannon, I appreciate it very much. Bruce in Eagle Rock, a little similar sentiment, says, I think Chick-fil-A's choice to remain closed on Sundays is a lot more of a fiscal impact than the boycott. They've continued to thrive. And Bruce's point is a good one in terms of how far the company's been willing to go to embody the values that it holds, believing that Sunday is the day of rest and that its employees should be with their families and the stores shouldn't be open. Obviously, for a fast food outlet, that is a huge loss of profits. Mio in Westwood says, I think in the long run, Chick-fil-A statements will hurt their business, but I respect their decision to come out on this issue. It lets the consumer know where to go and where not. Stephen in Mid-City, there's Chick-fil-A near us. My wife and I have talked about going there. Now we definitely will not. Again, share your comments online, AirTalk page, kpcc.org. My thanks to Larry Chavis, Assistant Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship, University of North Carolina, and Bill Peacock of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, where he directs the Center for Economic Freedom. It's AirTalk, and Hetty Lynn Hurties has the news.